Yes. Um, One of the core principles of agility is telling yourself the truth. The role of an agile coach or of any coach really is to hold up the mirror so you can see yourself the way you are. I'm going to share the next two questions with you. It's not going to really be possible to sort them out, but when you look at how you spend your time, how much of your time is spent in an efficient way, or how much of your time is being spent wasted on other stuff? Okay, and that's another kind of 0 to 10 scale. And this is perhaps the heart of everything. How happy are you at work? 0 to 10 scale. Okay, and so these questions, on the one hand, they're kind of giving us a temperature reading, and I'm seeing some people who are satisfied. I'm seeing some yes buts. I'm seeing 1 or 2 people who sound like they're ready for a change. I haven't seen anybody who's really enthusiastic about what they're doing. What is this trying to tell us? Okay, so let's just kind of hold that thought. I'd like to share with you a little bit what I do. So I call myself Mr. Alignment because that's actually what I'm very good at doing is helping organizations create alignment. And much of what personal agility is about creating, helping, or teaching the skills to create alignment. I've been in the Agile world officially since about 2006. I actually consider my first Agile project to be much earlier than that, around 1993. I recognized in that project most of the patterns of Scrum, but obviously I didn't realize what it was at the time, and I kind of wish that I had. I might be in Jeff Sutherland's shoes right now, but so it goes. One of the things that agility has been is it's been an absolute eye-opener, and it's been my gateway to the world. Here you see me with my son in Linwood, Washington, working with a gentleman named Joe Justice. Joe was the inventor of Agile or extreme manufacturing and the founder of the Wikispeed project. I met Joe in Vietnam at an Agile tour there. Okay, and that's the amazing thing is just how universal and what a door opener it's been. I've had the opportunity to work on a couple of very interesting projects. I was a co-founder of the World Agility Forum. I facilitate a group of Agile executives who go by that name, agileexecutives.org. And most recently, I was Chief Agility Officer for Vivior, a medtech startup here in Zurich. And oh yes, by the way, my day job is I've been a certified Scrum trainer. And this is me and my son learning how to apply agility to the problem of designing and building cars. And Joe Justice was the guy who, at least in my eyes, was the first person who recognized you could start with that Agile stuff, uncovering better ways. You could take out the word software development and you could apply it to almost anything, and it actually works pretty well. Now, I'd like to share 2 projects that I'm working on. One is the Global Product Owner Festival. I just started that. We're doing an experiment with free Agile training. So free product owner training for anybody, anywhere. My goal is to have 1,000 people there. And we've got a series of speakers who are going to be helping you extend your knowledge. Joe Justice, by the way, is one of them. We have a chief product owner for Swiss Radio and TV. Here in Switzerland is another, a couple names that you've probably heard of. And then my partner, Gianni Leonaghi, and I will be kind of helping people master the basics of product ownership. Okay, so, attending the conference is totally free. Love to see you there. The other project that I've been working on, Agile meets Contract, the Agile Contract Manifesto. So one of the things about business is businesses collaborate with other businesses. And contracts tend to, up until now, have been designed to set things in stone. But the problem is when things are set in stone, it's difficult to adapt to new information. So how do you do that? So we were a group of 13 practitioners, and we kind of went back to first principles and said, well, if 2 organizations are going to contract to work with each other and want to do it in an Agile way, how can they do that? And that's the Agile Contract Manifesto. And we're holding an event, I believe it's the 21st of May, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, if you go to agilecontractmanifesto.com, we're holding an event in the morning and then repeating the event with a different group of panelists. And as you'll see, we've got thought leaders and practitioners from both sides of or all sides of the table. That is, Agilists, procurement and sales, and they're going to be talking about what the Agile Contract Manifesto means to them. So it's going to be, I think a very interesting event. I'd encourage you to check out agilecontractmanifesto.org. join the event, maybe sign the manifesto if it resonates to you. And I hope it's going to be interesting. So let's get to the topic at hand, which is, we're talking about, secrets of Agile executives. So what do executives want to know about agility? I mean, a lot of businesses out there, they're trying to become more agile. We've got this term, business agility, but agility didn't really grow up in the C-suite. It started out in the software side. So, the executives are very often getting kind of pulled in, sometimes getting dragged in, kicking and screaming, if I could be so blunt. We're going to see some blunt language here tonight, but we'll come to that. I'm going to try to keep it down until you've been properly warned. So what do they ask about? Well, the first thing is, is this something real? I hear all these buzzwords like Scrum and story points and stuff like that. What is this about? Once they realize that this is more than buzzwords, then we start getting into the substance. Well, how can we use this to innovate faster? How can we get our business and technology people talking to each other? How are we going to get better at working with our customers? Okay. And then finally, it becomes personal. How can I make it a success? What does it mean for me? Okay. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you basically about three things. The first is, what does it mean to be agile, especially for an executive? What does it mean to be agile? Then I'm going to share the three secrets and the three tips and tell the three stories, as I promised. And then maybe take a short look at how to apply these tips in real life. Okay, so are you guys with me? So let's start with, what does it mean to be agile? Okay, now this is where I like to give a content warning. Okay, some of the materials you're going to hear may not be appropriate for immature audiences. Okay, beware of inconvenient truths, managerial discretion advised. Okay, now I'd like everyone to use the reactions and give me a thumbs up. If you're not ready to, if you don't want to handle this, this is the time to say I'd like to go back to something more civilized, something safer. There's a safe conference in the next Zoom room. Okay, so it looks to me like most people are ready to go. And those of you who aren't ready to go, well, you've been warned. So off we go. So what does it mean to be agile? I believe the term agile today is mostly a reference to the Agile Manifesto. When we talk about wanting business agility or companies to be more agile, agile is I mean, it's an English word and it kind of means something. And you Google for pictures of agility and you get you find dog competitions as they kind of try to jump around. But agility, the way we talk about it in business, really traces its roots to the Agile Manifesto, or more formally, the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. And this was a group of software developers kind of rethinking how they worked. And by the way, they were also rethinking management. Now, one of the problems that we have is, like any term, it kind of means what you say it means, and it kind of means certain things to different people and whatever. And so a lot of organizations try to apply agility, not very successfully. Okay, and you hear terms like the Agile Industrial the Agile Industrial Complex, fake agility, agile fatigue. So there's all sorts of, I'll call it bad agile, floating out there. And so I'd just like to say a couple words about what that's about. And there have been some attempts at fusion. I don't know if you noticed the subtlety there, but the Agile Manifesto came bottom up, the fake agility came top down. And Steve Denning was the first management author. He was actually a former manager at the World Bank. And he was the first management author to really take a deep look at agility and figure out what its potential was for companies. And he's come up with 3 laws of agility. So what I want to do is I want to take a brief look at each of these things and kind of see how they fit together. And I actually believe that, agility really means the same thing regardless of where you are in the company. Now, for a lot of people, agility means, oh my God, we got to do Scrum. Oh no, we don't want to do Scrum. That's too dangerous. We got to do Safe. No, wait a minute. Safe isn't Agile. Let's do less. You got to do user stories. You got to do story points. If it's not right, then you're doing it wrong. All of these practices, okay, and let's give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Some people would cast stones at this practice, another would cast stones at that practice, but let's just give everybody the benefit of the doubt and say these are practices and frameworks and methods that have been developed by people who share this thing called an Agile mindset, and they use it to help other people understand and apply that mindset. Okay, but the tools themselves are not the mindset. Okay, the tools help you get there, but if a fool with a tool is still a fool. So what does this mean for us in terms of actually trying to figure out what agility means? Well, I talked to you about the manifesto for Agile software development. We're uncovering better ways. Okay, let's take a closer look at that. We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others to do it. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer. Again, notice you can just ignore the rest. It's a very clear statement of purpose. Okay, and if we look at what these two sentences are trying to tell us, uncovering better ways, this is about learning. This is not about finding the best practice, it's about finding a better practice. I talked to Alistair Coburn, one of the authors of the manifesto. He said their image was archaeologists. Okay, we're a bunch of archaeologists digging in the dirt. Each one of us is just as dirty as the guy in the next pit. And every once in a while, we uncover something of value and we share what we learned. We exchange information with each other, searching for better ways. And you never really know when you found that last artifact. There might be something down there and there might not. Doing it and helping others to do it. Okay, so this is fundamentally about collaboration. It's about sharing information, sharing techniques. It's about learning from each other. And finally, our highest priority. They're very clear what their purpose is. So an Agilist not only knows what they're doing, they know why they're doing it. Okay, and this gives them some very unique advantages when we're talking about a complex world. So for me, a lot of people talk about the Agile mindset, and they say, oh, the problem with the manifesto is it doesn't define the mindset. Sure it does, it's right there. Learning, collaboration, and purpose. Okay, this for me is what it means to be Agile. And those three words are almost universally useful and helpful. And we'll see that as we get a little bit closer to it. Now, what is fake agility all about? Well, we got this learning, collaboration, and purpose, and then we've got real companies that exist the way they are, and they have top management, and they tell these Agile guys down there, oh yeah, well, if you want to do Scrum, that's fine. As long as it doesn't interfere with my bonus, you can do whatever you want. Okay, we could be a little cynical about this, but this is kind of the glass ceiling problem. Now, what you get in this context is for people who are, applying it, kind of under the radar, if you will, it's actually not too bad because they get to create these islands of common sense. But the problem with these islands of common sense is they're just barely over the waterline, and one change in the person is enough to, all of a sudden the floods come in and the island is gone and you have to start over from scratch. And Yahoo, by the way, was a classic example of this problem. They transformed to agility 3 times while they were still a company. The other problem is almost more challenging. It's the other way around. It's when top management says, oh, this is wonderful, guys, go be Agile, do Scrum, okay? And so you get something that looks like this. Everybody is commanded to do Scrum. No one was asked whether that was a good idea or not. So everyone's kind of running around with their heads cut off, trying to figure out what this means. And, most of the people, since no one really likes to be changed, no one likes to have their cheese moved, there's a lot of resistance and a lot of conflict. And, so I was listening to a talk from a senior Scrum Master at one of the early adopter insurance companies here in Switzerland. And I asked her after a talk on, the experience of 7 or 8 years of doing Scrum, what was your most valuable training after your basic Scrum training? And she said, conflict mediation. And I was totally stunned. Agile is supposed to be fun. We're supposed to be collaborative and cooperative. Why are you having this conflict mediation? Well, that's a side effect of the agility being commanded top down. Okay, so what about the companies that are trying to be, actually cooperative? The management gets it. Okay, and this is where Steve Denning's work is really interesting because, Steve, as I say, he discovered the existence of lean and agile and similar practices after he realized that classical management tended to be very destructive to any creative initiatives. And this work led him to become a member of the board at the Scrum Alliance for several years. And during that time, he says, I wonder if there are any companies out there that are really trying to be agile at the top level of the organization. And he founded what became known as the SD Learning Consortium. And this is, large companies. He was very proud of the fact that there was something like $1 trillion worth of stock market capitalization represented in their members, where they were genuinely trying to be agile at all levels of the organization. And what did he find? Well, he found that there were three commonalities which all of these companies had. The first he called the law of the customer. That is a focus on customer needs, in particular the needs of new customers. It's easy to focus on your existing customers. It's much harder to find new customers in new markets. Okay, an example of this would be Amazon, which had their internal IT services, and then they were able to turn that into a service to the world. The AWS, Amazon Web Services, so they could actually turn that into something they could sell. They bought the Washington Post and did the same thing. They took the Washington Post solutions and made them into solutions for the newspaper industry. So creating new markets, not just satisfying existing ones. The second one is the law of the network. Information flowing freely without friction through the organization. Okay, so we see this in Scrum. We often talk about impediments. Okay, this is the impediment finds its way from whoever notices the impediment to whoever can fix it. It moves quickly, and when it arrives at that person, they actually feel, they're actually able to do something about it. So the organization not only learns, but it's actually capable of reacting to new information. Okay, and finally, he talked about the law of the small team. And once again, an Amazon example, they talk about the two pizza team. Okay, which is two U.S. style pizzas. Probably they're not that different in Canada, but I'm really just guessing here. They're a little bit bigger than the ones that we get here in Switzerland, because here the pizzas tend to be individuals, but kind of the large economy size pizza usually will feed about 3 or 4 people. 2 of them will feed a team of 8 people, and the idea is to get people working together effectively. Okay, and this works better in small groups than big groups. Okay, now, so for him, agility is law of the network, law of the customer, law of small teams. And we had a lot of arguments and discussions, well, friendly arguments, are we on the same page here? But when you line up these two things, well, we talk about purpose, we talk about the customer. We talk about learning, we talk about information flowing through the network, and we talk about small teams, and we talk about collaboration. And we actually discovered that these two views of agility are surprisingly on the same page. Okay, so I actually believe that, if we see it as learning, collaboration, and purpose, not all organizations really have a customer, but all organizations benefit from being clear on what it is they're trying to do. They usually benefit if they learn rapidly, and they usually benefit if people collaborate together in a friendly and effective manner. Okay, and the other thing I've noticed doing executive workshops, when executives come and they start to formulate what their problems are and what their wishes are and what they would like the solution to be, you can usually map those wishes onto one of the 3 laws of agility. They either want, they want to get better at delighting their customers, they want to get better at reacting to new information, they want to break down their silos and get better at collaborating within the company. So, it's a pretty good representation of what agility is striving to achieve at an organizational level. Okay, now, as you know, agility has become a topic for leadership. I believe the 2016, there's been some articles written by some folks at Bain together with Jeff Sutherland were the first article. There's actually been, I think, 3 or 4 now in the Harvard Business Review. A couple of years later, the New York Times followed up with a classical management perspective on agility. Are you agile enough for agile management? Okay, so notice the fear component, which kind of misses the point, actually. It's about taking away the fear, but it also represents the way hierarchical organizations work, which is basically command and control. And the way control works is by being afraid of the consequences if something goes wrong. Now, what does this mean for an executive? Okay, now I actually believe you can be an agile executive. In fact, I work with a group of people who do exactly that. How do you be an agile executive? Well, you look for better ways of doing what you're doing, and you collaborate with other people along the way. Okay, and so this picture was taken about 3 days ago. We were holding our annual retreat, and we were looking at problems that the organizations were facing and looking for better ways to solving them. And in one case, there was something had gone seriously south, and they were trying to understand what happened so they could prevent it in the future. In another case, they had something. They had a fairly major change in vision for the organization, and they saw a lot of potential consequences that it could go south. So they were looking at how can we prevent it from going south. And then they had a misunderstanding about the relationship between the product owner of a product and the senior management of the company. We talked about how that, how these roles could fit together. Okay, and so by asking questions, by exploring alternatives, understanding the problem, looking at potential solutions, they were able to come up with good solutions or good strategies for dealing with their problems. Okay, and that's something you can do. This doesn't require a methodology. This is just, well, maybe it requires some facilitation. Okay, the facilitation is definitely helpful there. And the outside information, working with people from outside your company, is also helpful there. But there is no, there are no story points here. There's no sprinting here. Although I'm actually going to talk a little bit later about what applying some of the techniques of Scrum might mean for management, or what personal agility might mean for management. But that's kind of giving away some of the secrets now, isn't it? So I've been seeing in the chat a couple of requests for questions. Have there been any questions, or do we want to move forward? This might be okay. So what I'll do is that every time we come to one of these slides with 3 circles on it, I'll stop and see if there are any questions that we can take. So if you got a question, just go ahead and shoot it in the chat, and that way, if nothing else, we'll be ready to, we'll have lots of questions to discuss as soon as we get to the end of my talk. So let's start with the 3 secrets. Okay, so I got 3 examples of successful leaders, and we're going to reveal their secrets of agile leadership. You didn't think I was going to reveal them all at once, did you? I mean, that would be telling. Okay, so let's take them one at a time. For me, the first secret, people say change is hard. I disagree with this statement intensely. There are a lot of things out there in the agile world that I disagree with intensely. The other one is that Scrum is hard, but we'll save that one for maybe the Q&A. Change is easy if you want to do it. Okay, and if you don't believe me, go back and think about the many times that you have made a change in your life. You've decided to go to school. You've decided to emigrate. You've decided to return home. You've decided to get married. You've decided to get divorced. You've decided to have kids. There are all sorts of changes that go through your lives, okay? And you don't have this consequent inner resistance, okay? Where change is hard is when you get told to change, okay? This is where the Kubler-Ross model starts to take effect, where you go through the phases of grief, where first you go in denial, then you get angry, then you try to negotiate, then you get depressed, then you kind of, accept it, okay? And, change is a lot like death if it's forced upon you, okay? And that's really the difference. It's a very different thing to be fired than to decide to quit your job. It leaves you mentally in a very different place, okay? So change is easy if you want to do it. I wanted to take a very personal example for this one. And this is about losing weight. Okay, now a lot of people are confronted with weight, and some people have got very, very serious weight issues, which I did not have. So I don't want to say anything about anyone else's experience. I just want to talk about mine. 10 kilos is enough. If you get it in the right place, that is in your tummy, you start to notice it when you're trying to bend over and discover that it's difficult to do things like tie your shoes. So you have to, position yourself carefully. And, you just don't have quite the same energy getting up. And, I've been kind of aware for a long time that my weight had been creeping up. Now, some of you might be wondering, why is Agile even relevant here? Because, most of agility is about, we move carbs from the waiting column to the in progress column to the done column. And, but managing your weight is somehow different because it's about something you're going to do anyway. You're going to eat. Maybe you're going to eat less, maybe you're going to eat differently, and maybe you're going to do other things besides eating, like maybe get some exercise. but somehow, how is agility even relevant for this problem? Okay, and I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with Douglas Adams. Give me a thumbs up if you recognize the quote. Okay, and the movements of the small green pieces of paper. Oh dear, I'm showing my age, aren't I? Okay, well, anyway, as I was thinking about this problem, a friend of mine asked me, when you eat carbs, how do you feel? I said, I don't know, fine. Why? Well, have you ever noticed how, you eat carbs and then you get this, or carbohydrates, and you get kind of a high, you get a lot of energy, and then a little bit later you crash completely? And I said, no, not really. Oh, okay. Well, that high and low, that's your body turning carbs into sugar and processing it, and it produces these highs and lows. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And 2 days later, I noticed it, and it was like after lunch, I'd had a pizza for lunch, and afterwards, I was just, oh God, I can barely move. And all of a sudden, it hit me what the carbs were doing to me. And I said, I don't like that. I really don't like how I feel, after having had too many carbs at lunch. So I resolved to avoid sugar and carbohydrates. Okay, and the reason we say carbohydrates is carbohydrates resolve into sugar, and they cause all the problems. And it turns out that if you cut down on your carbohydrates, cut down on your sugar, at some point the level gets down low enough that the metabolism of your body switches, and instead of consuming the carbohydrates, it starts metabolizing the fat that's accumulated in your body. And so after avoiding almost all carbohydrates for a week, maybe 10 days, all of a sudden the kilos just kind of start disappearing. So you'll notice what I did here. I didn't say I'm not going to eat sugar and carbohydrates, okay? Because, if I said that, the first time that I gave in to one of those chocolate eclairs, well, I failed, and I'm just a miserable person, and, how can I possibly hold my head up again? But I just said I'm going to avoid them, which is kind of admitting that I might make a mistake from time to time, or I might not have a choice from time to time. But on the other hand, and at the time I was doing a lot of traveling in hotels. Remember hotels, we used to go to conferences and things. And you go to the breakfast counter, and it's all carbs. Okay, and for me, I'd look at that and I'd be like a vegetarian at the meat counter, and I'd say, whoops, nothing for me there. And I'd go on to the next counter and find something to avoid. And so from August down to about November, I lost about 6 kilos, maybe 7, I forget it. I think it was 6. Okay, so I'd like you to imagine for a minute, when we talk about achieving long-term goals, I'd like you to imagine that you're the captain of a sailing ship. Okay, and so we're back in the, 17th or 18th century. There's no GPS. So how do you navigate over the ocean? How do you get, say, from the west coast of Europe to the, to the Caribbean? Well, basically what you do is you plot your course. Okay, and then you're gonna set sail. You're gonna say, well, if I'm on course, then I'm gonna take a fix. Oh, wait a minute. Well, how do you take a fix? Well, it turns out we have what we call navigation stars. So the sun is one of them. You can look at what time the sun comes up and what time it sets. The pole star is another one. You can look at the angle to the pole star and figure out your longitude. There are other stars that you could use, like Orion's belt, and on the basis of these things, you can figure out where you are, and then you can compare where you are to where you thought you should be. And if you're on course, that's great. And if not, well, you've got to turn the boat to the left or the right to get back on course. Now, what happens if you get caught in a storm? Okay, well, you'll notice the boat is small, the waves can be quite large, and there you are, you might be very busy just keeping the boat afloat. Okay, and in gaming, there is a technical term for the boat sinking. It's called game over, which is generally considered to be a bad thing. If nothing else, you have to put another quarter in the machine or a jeton in the machine for it to play the next game. But basically, you want to keep the boat afloat. Now, how were we going to do the navigation? When we're worried about keeping the boat afloat, can we see the stars? Can we see the horizon? No. Okay, so we don't know where we are. And like I say, we might be very busy just keeping the boat afloat. So that boat could drift off course. Okay, so in the metaphor, our destination, these are the goals that we're trying to achieve. Okay, so we talk about Jamaica, and the storm. This is urgent stuff that's distracting us from getting things done. And now we're back to my weight loss problem. Well, for some reason, all of my family decided that I needed a lifetime supply of my favorite candy from the US. And so I ended up with about 2 kilos of these things that showed up just in time for Christmas. And I did my duty. I ate every one of them. I tried to palm some of them off into my family, but they weren't having any of it. So I ate quite a bit of them. Remember those 8 kilos that I lost? Well, I found 2 of them again. Okay. In the language of our metaphor, I had gotten totally off course. I'm now drifting off to Antarctica when I'd set sail to Jamaica. Okay. And this is where we say, wait a minute, I'm off course here. And this is where you take a fix. You say, where am I? Where is Jamaica? In this case, Jamaica is 80 degrees off to the, or 100 degrees off to the right. So we got to turn the boat and point it in the right direction. Okay, and so this navigation metaphor, well, if you get blown off course, you know, number one, recognize it. Number two, change your course to get back on course. That proves to be a powerfully useful metaphor when we're talking about achieving any kind of long-term goals. Okay, so here is the thing. It's your boat. It's your life. It's your boat. Life is the ocean. You're the captain of the boat on the sea. And what your private life is concerned, you're not only the captain of the boat, you're the owner of the boat. You get to decide where it goes. Now, when I got this metaphor, I was actually not a sailor, but a pilot, as in flying airplanes. And I actually flew a small airplane over the ocean. And someone asked me, have you ever been afraid while you've been a pilot? And I've been in some difficult situations, okay? There are people who have been in more difficult situations, but you know, every pilot has their moment. But every time that I was in a difficult situation, I was so focused on the situation, I didn't have time to be afraid. I was there, you know, if you got time to be afraid, you got time to do something better. And if you are afraid of the airplane, well, then it's time to stop flying the airplane because, you know, you're not up to it, okay? What I've noticed in people is some people are passengers in their lives and some people have their hand on the rudder. They're the captain of their boat and they perceive the world around them completely differently. So whatever else happens, remember, it's your boat. You get to choose what happens next, okay? Celebrate what you've accomplished. Celebrate that the boat is still afloat and choose what you want to do next to get yourself closer to your Jamaica, okay? So that was the first secret. Change is easy if you want to do it. By the way, what does this mean for change programs? Well, you need to market them. You can't sell them and you can't force them. But if you market them, people will buy them. Okay, so think of change leadership more like marketing and less like sales and less like a military action. So what's the second secret? Secret number 2. Do we have any questions? No, still no questions. Okay, so next thing is clarity on what really matters. Okay, I'd like to share you the story of what, actually, this is one of my first clients. Jörg, it's interesting. It's also an aviation story. Jörg was a software engineer who took over a small specialty manufacturer of aviation parts. Okay, in particular, altimeters for hot air balloons. And the company was challenged, but you know, he understood the technology and he loved ballooning and he had good relationships with the customers and partners, and he thought he could save the company. And by the time that I met him, it was not going well. The finances were not going well, and he had to let some people go. But the work still had to be done. So he was doing, you know, more and more of the work himself, to the point where he was probably working 80 hours a week. And he came to me and says, Peter, I got too many things to do. Everything is urgent. I can't figure out how to prioritize this. What do I do? Okay. And so basically what we did is, you know, we use the priorities map, which is kind of like a Kanban, if you're familiar with Kanban, except we not only visualize the work in progress, we also visualize the priorities. That leftmost column here, the what really matters column, is your priorities. And these color codes, they map particular tasks back to the priority, back to why it matters. Okay. And so we sat down with Jörg, we spent some time figuring out, you know, what was he spending his time on, what was important to him. He identified 7 different priorities. development of a new product, maintenance of an existing product, support of the customers, concluding sales, negotiating with investors, and two, maybe three other things that I don't remember anymore. So we had quite a long list, and everything was urgent. Everything had to be done. And so, we wrote down some tasks. He did his planning for the week and, went off to deal with life. Came back 2 weeks later, was feeling kind of unhappy. He'd still been working like crazy, but he hadn't, but he didn't feel like he was making any progress. But we kind of went through the motions of figuring out what he'd gotten done, celebrating what he'd gotten done, figuring out what was the most important thing to do moving forward. And he was scheduled for an hour. After about an hour and a half, he left maybe an hour and 3/4. He left my office. He was feeling a little guilty because he'd spent too long at my office. And just as he left the building, he had this aha moment. I want to save the company. That was the number one thing on my priority list, is I want to save the company. But you know what else? I want to have a decent life. And he went home, opened the door. His wife was there. He says, "Honey, I'm home. I've come to a realization." She's saying, "Okay, yeah, what's that?" "You know how I've been trying to save the company for the last 2 years?" "Yeah." "Well, I've decided, yeah, that's important, but I also want to have a decent life." And she's saying, "Okay, so what does that mean?" And he said, "Well, how about we go see a movie tonight?" And she nearly fell out of her chair. She says, "You haven't proposed something like that in 2 years." Okay, and they went out to see a movie. Okay, so notice how clarity on what really matters, all of a sudden you can make different decisions about how to spend your time and how to use your time. And you can also communicate the change, and people will understand it right away. When Howard Sublett took over the Scrum Alliance as chief product owner, I remember him he was getting up on stage at the Experience Agile event in Lisbon. And he'd been on the job for about 2 weeks, and there was a lot of the glitterati of the Agile community. David Stoughton was there, Steve Denning was there, a lot of other people were there. Some of them liked the Scrum Alliance, some of them believed in the Scrum Alliance, some of them hated the Scrum Alliance. All of them had strong opinions of the Scrum Alliance. Howard got up, basically said 2 sentences. "Okay, I've been on the job for 2 weeks, so obviously I've solved all of our problems." "No, but there are 2 things I want you to know. First of all, we're about transforming the world of work, and it's not about the money, okay? And we're going to make decisions on the basis of that." And you could feel the weight shifting in the room as everybody, whether they were friend, foe, or neutral in the issues around the Scrum Alliance, they were reevaluating how they felt about the Scrum Alliance and what their position was vis-a-vis the Scrum Alliance. Okay, so clarity on what really matters makes it possible for you to communicate what's going on. It makes it possible for you to create alignment with the people around you. Okay, so this is a hugely powerful force. Now, if we go back to the Agile Manifesto, we see that the first element in the Agile Manifesto is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Okay, now I'd like to introduce a concept. This is called emergence. Okay, so if we look at this picture, we see a flock of birds. Okay, now if you zoom in on those birds, all you see are birds, but there is a flock there. It flies together, it hunts together, it defends itself from, collectively from attackers. That flock is an emergent property of birds flying together. To the answers and then sharing your own answers to those questions. These are very powerful for identifying a common purpose, for identifying what really matters. Okay, and the other thing is, well, what holds that flock together? And it turns out there's no centralized intelligence, there's no, puppeteer, with pulling strings on the marionette. Okay, those birds have basically got 3 very simple rules of the road to keep the flock together. First one is, don't get too close to your neighbor. Second one is, don't get too far away from your neighbors. And the third is fly in the general direction of your neighbor. Okay, and those 3 rules keep the flock together. Okay, and if you don't follow the rules, you're not part of the flock. Okay, so this is something which in leadership has not gotten much attention. I won't say it's gotten 0 attention, but it hasn't gotten a lot. But it turns out, when we're trying to create large organizations and get them moving together in the same direction, the rules of the road, emergence is more powerful than process. Okay, and if we can learn to shape, create a common vision, create a direction where we want to go, and then create rules of the road that encourage the flock to stay together, all of a sudden we've got the potential for some very powerful, powerful leadership tools. Okay, so basically what we're trying to do as leaders, especially as agile leaders, is we want to harness emergence. We want our groups to form something bigger than what they are. Clarity of purpose, rules of the road. Okay, and when you do that, when you make a change in direction, when you communicate why you're here, everyone will understand, will understand you right away. Okay, we ready for number 3? Agility works for leaders too. You can actually apply the techniques yourself. You can apply them to your life. You can apply them to your leadership team. And agility is not just for software people anymore. Okay, and here I'd like to share the story of Walter Stulzer. Walter was is still, well, he's kind of semi-retired now, the executive director of FutureWorks, a creative consultancy based in Zurich. And Walter had taken the company. He was a partner in a larger consulting company. The partners didn't have a common vision of where they wanted to go. So basically the partners split off and each one took their part of the company in the direction that they wanted to go. And so this is kind of where FutureWorks started from, okay? And the problem was, from Walter's perspective, well, when he pushed the cart would move. When he didn't push the cart wouldn't move. And what this meant was, they had serious issues with personal fluctuation. They had issues with profitability, and the company was not going to be in a good way if they didn't make changes. So Walter did what you did. They dedicated 10% of their leadership capacity to improving the company. They identified a large number of initiatives of things that they could do to improve the company. Walter gave the company 2 years to achieve the goal, and they went to work. Okay, and so here you can see them working on the various different initiatives. And well, the problem is when you got so many things going like that, it's hard to be really focused on any of them. You get halfway into something and then you discover that you're not doing it right, and you've made some wrong assumptions. You got to start over from scratch. So from these, I don't know, 30 initiatives, how many of them do you think were finished after 2 years? How many of them do you think could achieve the goals that they'd set out for? Okay, let's throw some guesses. Okay, so I see a 2, I see a 0. Anyone else want to take a guess? I see a 3. Okay, you guys are getting colder. The first guess was the right one. None. Well, that's not quite true. That's not quite true. They did, in fact, manage to create a new logo, which was good. It's a new company, with a new name, you need a new logo, but that didn't really help them address the more fundamental issues of taking the company forward and making it into a profitable, viable organization where people wanted to be there. So this is where I got involved. And, at a certain level, we were in the same situation. The difference was, Walter said, I'd like the team to do Scrum. And I said, well, Walter, if you want this to be a success, you need to commit to be a part of it. And he did, okay? And so he and his leadership, they learned about Scrum, they learned about personal agility. Walter in particular, realized that the situation was such that with this endless backlog, there was no way that he could lead the company properly. He needed to have, be light on his feet and be able to act proactively. In terms of the prerequisites, same as before, they dedicated 10% of their leadership capacity to improving the company, but this time they worked in sprints. This time they only committed to a few initiatives at a time. Usually they had 2 or 3 things going on in practice. Okay, 2 or 3 things going on in parallel. They worked in roughly 3-week sprints. After every sprint, they looked at what they'd accomplished, they looked at what worked, they looked at what didn't work, they decided what to do next. And 6 months later, they had achieved all of the goals that they'd set for themselves 2.5 years previously. Okay, and basically, I found out later, yeah, it was actually a matter of saving the company. They were financially headed for the wall if they didn't react soon. Okay, so what was different? Well, for Walter, what was really amazing was they were able to achieve in a quarter of the time, with half of the work, all of the goals that they had set before. Okay, now maybe you've heard of Jeff Sutherland's book, Twice the Work in Half the Time. He got the proportions right, but the absolute numbers wrong. It's all the results with half the work in a quarter of the time. Okay, and that really worked for them, and the company is still going today. What for Walter was really important was this concept of ending the week with satisfaction, starting the week with confidence. In the meantime, he's actually reduced that to, I want to end each day with satisfaction and start each day with confidence. And the problem here is, if you have this endless backlog, you start feeling like you're running in this endless treadmill. It's not possible to things that he wanted to get done in any given week. Okay, and that's personal agility is what made that possible for him. Okay, so let's talk about this concept of agile transformation. What are you doing with an agile transformation? Okay, and here I'm going to quote Joe Justice, because I think he's formulated this the most succinctly. An agile transformation is about restructuring the company. Okay, it's not about changing the wheels on the train or on the car. It's about restructuring the company. What are we striving to do? Well, we want to optimize for speed. We want to optimize for value production. Okay, we're probably going to want to optimize for innovation. We're probably going to want to be closer to our customers. And all of that is a culture change as well as an organizational change. Okay, but the purpose is to be able to deliver more value faster. And that's something that almost any CEO can understand and sign up for. Okay, so what does it mean? The secret is apply agility to leadership. And the important thing is to start with yourself. Okay, now, why is it so important to start with yourself? Well, if you don't understand agility here, you can't explain it to anyone else. And the thing is, as a leader, leaders need to lead. Okay, and it puts a leader in a very embarrassing position if they're dependent on other people, either their subordinates or externals, if they're not in the leadership role. So it's actually very important for the leader to be able to lead the charge into agility, as it were. So this is why we say start with yourself. And what I'd like to do is kind of look at how to do that. So I saw a wow moment. That's cool. So do we have any questions at this point? Question going once. I see some applause. I'll take a bow for that. Okay. Going once.
Maru, you want to ask a question?
No, I just wanted to share how powerful, really powerful these things are. It resonates so much, so deeply with me. It's my suffering. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk about how to apply these secrets. Okay. So you heard me say before, start with yourself. Okay. And if you're an executive, and if you're not the executive in question, then encourage the executive to start with themselves. I've seen executives try to dodge getting involved, and we have to understand the executives. They want to be the leaders. They need to be the leaders. If they're not leading, they're somehow not doing their job. And the other thing is they're often working in very high fear environments. Okay, there's a lot of competition for their role. The one thing you're not allowed to do in a big company is make a mistake. Okay, so there's a lot of pressure. And what we're starting to do is when you start with yourself, first of all, you see how powerful it is for yourself. All of a sudden it makes sense. all of a sudden you can explain it to other people. So like with one of my customers, I've been working with them about 3 years now. I knew that this was going to work when a member of the board of the directors explained to me why Scrum was in their interest. Okay, you know, they've understood it here, and that way we're not going to have any further arguments about it. Okay, and then, you know, some people talk about top down or bottom up. I prefer to think from the inside out, and the inside is wherever it starts. Okay, so, you know, you start with yourself and then you take it to your team. Okay, now if that's an executive team, that makes your life much easier for the organization, because, you know, we'll start to say, you know, we get everybody, you know, at this executive level, you know, developing a new set of values and principles, how they want to work together, you know, based on agility. And, you know, if they get it, well, one of the things that's going to happen is they're going to start to trust each other, which they may or may not have done before, and they're going to be less willing to attack each other because they trust each other. You know, and only then can you take it out to the rest of the organization. Okay, so premature scaling, I actually believe is a failure pattern. Okay, so let's talk about this. You know, how do you do it yourself? Well, maybe let's look at the issue at a very personal level. How many of you resonate with this? You got too much to do and not enough time to do it. Anybody not resonate with this? I mean, this is the story of our times. Okay, and there's a reason for that. Okay, so, you know, the problem is there are no limits on how much people can ask you to do. You've got 3 different bosses. They have no idea, you know, what else you have to do. They know what they need, so they say, you know, give me more. You, on the other hand, have a constraint. There are only so many hours in the day. Okay, you can only work a certain number of those days. Okay, if you work too much, what's going to happen? Well, sooner or later, we say time is your most valuable currency. Okay, you could only spend it once. Well, health is your most valuable asset. If you lose it, you may never find it again. Okay, so if you push your capacity too hard, sooner or later your body is going to go on strike. Okay, so, you know, you can what is it? You can file away at the margins here, but the basic physics you can't change. Now, so a common response to this, both at the level of individuals and at the level of organizations, is to say, oh, well, let's multitask. I'm stuck here, so let's go work on that. Oh, I'm stuck here, let's go work on something else. Okay, and they actually think that this is a good thing. Well, the problem is it's not. You know, the problem is, you know, when you stretch yourself like this, you never actually get anything done, but you work like crazy. Okay, and in fact, maybe you have the feeling that you're working like crazy and not getting anything done. Well, that's because you are working like crazy and not getting anything done. That's because you're cycling through all of these things. Now, the other problem when you're working like crazy is you're under too much pressure and you say, no, I don't have time to stop and think. I've got to get this stuff done. Well, the reality is that some of the stuff that you can do, some of it matters and some of it just keeps you busy. Okay, and if you reflect on which of the things that matter and focus on them, then you can actually have impact. Okay, now that's only part of that's half of the job. The other thing is, you know, remember all those storms that we told you about, the other stakeholders trying to get you stuff that get you to do other stuff? Well, you know, a certain amount of perseverance, you know, and being able to stay focused over a long period of time is necessary to achieve long-term goals. Okay, and if you don't do that, well, you know, what we need to do is we need to focus out. I mean, it's obviously it's easy to spend time on stuff that doesn't bring value. Okay, sometimes we call that procrastination. But if you work on stuff that doesn't bring value, well, you're not going to have the impact that you're hoping for. Okay, so, you know, we talked basically about 3 skills. The first is actually doing stuff. The second is prioritizing. And the third is asking questions. Am I working according to priority? And have I set the right priority? Okay, now I believe that, you know, through this combination of iteration and focus and prioritization, I believe there is a huge potential to improve the performance of leadership and of organizations. Okay, I've skipped some of the details, but basically a lot of the techniques that are applied in Scrum can also be used at a personal level and can be used at a leadership team level. Okay. So would you like to kind of apply this to your world? Well, how would you go about doing that? Well, I'm going to give you some suggested steps, and then I'm going to be done, and we can go into the Q&A or discussion part. Let's start with a simple question. How happy are you with how you spend your time? Okay, take 20 minutes, sit down with your agenda, look at maybe your emails, just kind of see what happened and say, how did you spend your time? What did you spend your time on? Are you happy with it? Okay, if the answer is no, this is the time to say, okay, well, let's apply agility. Let's make how I use my time transparent, and let's spend more time on things I care about and less time on things I don't. Okay, I actually just did this with someone a week ago, a senior leader for an organization, and he looked at how he used his time and he said, my God, I did not do anything for myself. And he was like totally stunned. It was like a blind spot on his radar screen. And well, one of the nice things about making visible, on the other hand, on the one hand, he wasn't very happy, but on the other hand, he was, because he says, well, now I can do something about that moving forward. Okay. Now, how do we make this triage? We have 6 questions. The first one is what really matters. That might not be the easiest question to answer at the beginning. It might take you a while to figure out the answer to that one. And yes, it does change from time to time, so don't worry about it. But once you do have it figured out, that's actually gives you very powerful information, which informs what you do with the remaining questions. Okay. The second question is, what did you do last week? Okay. So if we go back to the navigation model, that's taking a fix. That's understanding where you are. Okay. Celebrating what you've got done, celebrating that the boat is still afloat, regardless of whatever else happened. Okay. Then the next question is, well, what could you do? Now, remember, you got a lot of, you got a lot of things on your to-do list. The problem is you don't have anywhere near enough time to do all of them. So we can just get rid of the illusion. We're not going to be able to do everything, but that leads us to a choice. What are we going to spend our time on? Okay, so the first question, or the question number 3, is about identifying what you could spend your time on. The fourth question is about triage. Well, of all the things I could do, what's important, what's urgent, and what's going to make me happy? Okay, and as a friendly tip from me to you, if you're not doing anything to make yourself happy, you're on your way to burnout or worse. So, having some stuff, regardless of how busy you are and whatever else is going on in your life, doing things for yourself is almost always a good investment of your time, if it's in proportion, obviously. Okay, and then now that you've kind of understood how these, each of these tasks fit into the bigger picture, okay, what do I want to get done this week? What's a small list of 2 or 3 things that I'd really like to accomplish that are going to get me a step closer to whoever I'm trying to be? Okay, and that's really the idea. Last week you were somebody. Okay, you got some stuff done that made you who you are today. Okay, you are who you are because you do what you do. Okay, if you're not the person you want to be, well, that means you need to start doing something different. Okay, and by the way, that applies to your organization as well. So the idea is next week should take you, you're going to get some more things done, and you'd like those things to take you a step closer to the person you want to be or to the goals that you want to achieve. Okay, and so the idea is once a week we take a fix, once a week we adjust our course, and the idea is we strive to approach whatever it is, whatever our destination is. So how does this work in a business context? Okay, so my belief is that when you learn personal agility, what you're learning are skills that are just essential in the business, well, really in any context, but especially in business. One of the things that's gotten a lot of resonance is this concept of the focus on impact. Okay, it's not just about doing things, it's about doing things that make a difference for your customer, for your company, for your team, for whoever. I was talking to Walter about this. Walter was saying, man, I wish I had a company full of people who could focus on impact. In fact, it would be amazing if just 30% of them would focus on impact. Okay, because it's a rare skill. Most people don't do that. Now, the leaders probably don't need that, but many of them are going to be really happy if their employees do. How do we do that? Well, the whole what really matters question enables us to focus on purpose. Okay, we're based on dialogue. Okay, dialogue goes in two directions. Dialogue is based on questions. Okay, and by using dialogue, we can activate the intelligence in the room. By using dialogue, we can figure out what really matters, which gives us the basis for creating alignment. Okay, and this is really what we're trying to do in an organization. How do we get that flock flowing in the direction that we want, and how do we get that flock to stay together? Okay, and this is what personal agility, personal agility teaches you how to do. Okay, so how do we take this into the transformation? Well, my suggested approach, you're the leader doing this. So the first person is one leader in the leadership team, then you expand it to the leadership team. The leadership team is going to learn personal agility and basically coach each other and dialogue with each other on applying it. While they're doing this, this is the time to start thinking about, well, where do we need help? Think of those questions I asked you at the beginning. Are we working effectively? Are we working efficiently? Are we happy? What do we need to change? Identifying the low-hanging fruit for the transformation. Okay, and what we're really doing here is creating alignment, at least in the leadership team and maybe even beyond, about where to take the organization. Probably one of the most important things to do is to introduce cadence into the leadership team, something that looks a lot like the Scrum, planning and review cycle. Although I'm going to say a lot like, it's not exactly Scrum, and we're not going to have the leadership team doing Scrum for 100% of their work, but certainly for the transformation work, to being able to set goals that are relatively short term, achieve them and measure the performance. And whether this is the leadership team or a transition team, that kind of depends. But the idea is to get this cadence going in the organization, because like a microprocessor has a clock, this cadence in the organization allows it to process information effectively, take in new information, make decisions, and then act on those decisions without politics afterwards. Okay, where that takes you afterwards, it's interesting. If you look at some of the more command and control approaches to transformation, they give you these big pictures that tell you what it's going to look like. Here we say, let's get the people, let's get the organization going in an agile way, get people solving problems and collaborating with each other, and they're actually going to figure out what that big picture looks like as they move forward. The thing about the transformation, though, is it's driven by return on investment. Okay, so like those questions that I used at the beginning, we're going to use them to identify the low-hanging fruit, identify where for a small investment we can get big improvements in the performance of the company. Okay, now maybe one last thought when you're working with executives. This is something that I've been chewing on a lot lately, because one of the things, remember we said executives don't like to be seen learning in front of their staff. They want to be a step ahead of their staff. What this means is to send executives into public trainings or team trainings, unless they decide to do that for themselves. That's usually not the right place to start, because it's just too risky for them. They've got too much to lose. What I think is more promising is some kind of private, we could call it private coaching or private training, one-on-one. And what I think might actually be even better is semi-private, two people working together. Obviously, big issue here is trust. Okay, doing that in the team training, the trust just isn't there, but doing it with one other person can be very powerful. And in fact, one of the things I've noticed is that if two executives are really aligned in the company about what the problems are and what the solutions are, they can be very impactful in their work. Okay, and maybe particularly as you're going beyond the initial setups, that you could work in small groups, maybe a single executive team at once, if one or two of the executives are already on board. Anyway, with that, I am going to say thank you very much. I hope that this has been interesting and useful to you. The book is available for free download. Obviously, you're welcome to make a contribution if you like, but you can get the book from my homepage at satnetwork.pbk or satnetwork.ch/pbk. I will put this link in the chat. And let's see what we have in the way of questions. Jean-René, the chat has been scrolling by faster than I've been able to watch it. So what's been coming up in the way of questions?
Not so much, but if you want to ask questions directly to Peter, go ahead, please.
Okay. So what I'm going to do, while you guys are thinking about that, I'm going to put the link.
Kalina?
First link is the link to the book. And I will also share my LinkedIn if you'd like to reach out, and my email if you'd like to reach out to me.
Okay.
What happens if they say, tell us what to do, boss?
Mm-hmm. And Kalina has a question for you, Peter.
Yeah.
Hi, Peter. Thank you very much for this packed and coherent interconnection. So it's really good. But I just wanted a little drill down, just a little into the example with that person you worked with an executive 6 months, and they from 0 went to 6 months and all that. I'm curious about the how did he choose the purpose, and what was the purpose that he found and communicated, and how
Okay.
did that hit home, so to say?
Okay. So let me give you. I'd like to tell you the story of a different case, because I was more into the whole case and can give you a better and more complete example. So this was a startup company. They were rather challenged with well, they were challenged by COVID, and they were challenged with the acceptance of their product. They had 3 different areas, all of which were looking quite promising. None of them were delivering the results that they'd hoped for. And they were realizing that they were starting to realize that they were stretched a bit thin. And this was causing a lot of stress in the organization, particularly at the senior levels, that is at the senior leadership and board level. So what did we do? Well, the first thing we needed to do was figure out what the problem was. Okay. And this is where I did a series of interviews with all of the key leaders to understand the problem. What are we trying to accomplish? Why are we here? You know, what is the mission of the company? What's making it difficult? What are we afraid of? What are we frustrated by? You know, what's our definition of awesome? Okay. And so I asked these same questions to pretty much problem was. And it became very quickly clear. Everybody in the company knew they needed to focus, but there was no agreement what to focus on. Okay. So, you know, now that we know what the problem is, we can do something about it. And so we said, okay, let's call a workshop together. You know, we're going to use the workshop to kind of present what we've learned. And we got 3 possibilities that we could focus on. And we said, okay, let's get a champion for each case. And the champion is going to make his best pitch. And then after the pitch, we're going to ask clarifying questions to, you know, kind of really understand it. And, you know, getting these guys to ask clarifying questions, I mean, they were so stressed, you know, they were kind of full in the mode of no one would let anyone else finish their sentences because they were just so struggling to be heard. And so what we did is we made certain that everyone got to finish their sentences and finish their thoughts. So, you know, they had time for the pitch, and then we had time for clarifying questions. We had a strong rule about no debating. You know, we want to surface information, but, you know, if we start debating, that just brings us in a downward spiral and makes consensus impossible. So, you know, kind of after we'd heard all the cases and heard the pros and cons of the cases, we called it to a vote. Okay, and the people in the room who were both board and operative, they, you know, gave them their thumbs up for the ones that they wanted, and there was a clear majority for one case. And in fact, the champion for the second most popular case threw his support. He was a board member. He threw his support behind case number 1. And the next day, the board got together and formally ratified that decision. And the company was able to move forward without any significant political resistance after that. Okay, so this is figuring out what really matters, figuring out what we want to achieve, and then doing that. Okay, and we basically, over the course of the next 6 months, you know, Scrum has this concept of a product goal. What are we trying to achieve? We have the concept of a sprint goal. What are we trying to achieve this week? And we use that concept to kind of navigate through the next 6 months. And I think we said the time I was there, we had 3 product goals. So, you know, we either achieved it or realized that this isn't what we needed to do. We defined a new product goal, worked to that until it was clear. And that's basically how we turn the company around.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Peter.
Yes.
It seems that the personal agility system can spread into a company very quickly because of this dialogue and this. Okay, and I would like to know whether you have noticed any key factors that help this personal agility system to spread over any company. There are some key elements that need to be in place in order to help spreading it out.
So one of the big differences between personal agility and every other agile framework, with the possible exception of personal Kanban, you don't need any agreement to do it. It's 100% in your jurisdiction if you decide to do it or not. So, let's say you're my manager and I decide I want to do personal agility. I can start doing it to manage my time and to make better decisions about how to use my time. And you may or may not be aware of it. Okay. If we have a one-on-one, I can use the questions of personal agility to guide that one-on-one conversation so that I have a clear understanding of what matters to you and how my work fits into the mission of our department, how the department's mission fits into the goals of the larger organization. And so this makes it possible for me to, get very clear on what I need to be spending my time on. Okay. Now there are some delicate side effects here because very often the what really matters question isn't really clear in the company. Mm-hmm. And so it actually puts your manager in kind of a difficult situation, which is perhaps one of the risks and side effects, which is perhaps why I prefer to start more at the top than at the bottom with these things. Okay. Because if the leadership gets clear on what matters to them and starts to communicate what matters to them, then all of a sudden everyone else, can kind of find their place. Okay. If they're unclear about what really matters, then it's very difficult for anyone to find their place. Okay. Right now, I don't think anyone does this better than Elon Musk. At Tesla, they're about making, energy sustainable. At SpaceX, they're about making humanity interplanetary. How does this help us get to Mars? Okay. And everything else is subservient to that.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Jovan?
Thank you so much for the presentation so far. Peter, I did want to ask a question. I mean, there's my Kanban, right? So once I started using this little improvised board here, things kind of skyrocketed, right? But there's this ratio that I would like to set in terms of expectations. Not just on a personal growth level, but also when it comes to expectations with the customers and the business, right? So from your experience, how do you manage the timelines? When some things are going to take more than 6 months to develop, to kick off, some things are going to take a couple of years. Now, how do you tackle those items on a C level, right? So where do you start off? There was a think big but start small, right? But
think big but start small. Yeah. Okay. Remember I said I don't think anyone is doing this better today than Elon Musk. So let's look at how Elon Musk built Tesla. Okay. So what Elon Musk did is he started with this vision for the world that he wanted some number of years in the future. And that's a world where, transportation and energy is mostly based on sustainable energy. Okay, how do we get there from here? Okay, and basically what he did was a remember the future exercise, starting at a time when all of the manufacturers are making electric cars, all of the energy is coming from solar, and started thinking back about, well, what happened before that, what happened before that, what happened before that. Okay, one of those points was, well, the cars that we're making are so much better than what everyone else is making that they have to follow suit because, they're going to be destroyed if they don't. Okay. And that was something that happened about a year ago. Okay. When all of a sudden the major auto manufacturers realized if we don't do electric, we're dead. Okay. Because Teslas are so much faster and more economical and easier to maintain and everything else. There's just no reason to buy, an internal combustion engine at this point, except for maybe some specialty applications. But notice that's still pretty far in the future. It says, well, how do we get there? Well, we're selling a mass market car. We've got some luxury cars. We're doing trucks. We're doing this. We're doing that. Okay, how do we get to the mass market car? Well, we did a high profitability, but medium volume, high profitability luxury car. How do we get to that? Well, we did a very high profitability, very low volume sports car to kind of convince the world that we're serious. Okay, and so this led them to first they do the Roadster, then they do the Model S, then they do the Model 3, then they start branching out into other models. Okay, and so so basically this is the whole visioning thing, and you work it back down to what are we going to start to work on today? Okay, and in personal agility, we use this concept of what really matters, and we can talk about having medium-term goals and say, well, what are the medium-term goals and what's going to get us to those goals? Okay, and that's basically how you do the planning. Does that answer your question?
Gives me the train of thought and the direction where to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Any other question for Peter?
Any other example besides Ellen would be a good topic for discussion, right? And there's Bezos with AWS and
Okay, what would you like to hear?
Peter, I think this is going to be quite an easy question for you, but it does arise. What do you say to people who say, well, what really matters for us is that we respect the regulations?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so
long as we stay within the regulations, then we've got a business. We can launch our products, and I guess I'm sharing an example where what really matters isn't very ambitious. How do you react to that?
One of the interesting things about emergence is that it does not require an explicit purpose. Okay, if we go back to that flock of birds, there's no leader of that flock of birds saying, let's go to South America. Okay, and so an emergence entity, its purpose is what it does. Okay, so if we look at organizations, one of the challenges is that most agile frameworks, they kind of evolved in a product development context, and that works great if what you're doing looks like product development. It's challenged a bit, but I think it still works when we talk about doing organizational transformation, because we can think of today we've got company version 1, and a year from now we're going to have company version 2, or maybe company version 1.4, depending on how ambitious we are. But if we're running a hospital, or if we're running a community, that is the administration for a government entity like the city hall or something like that, there is no transformative purpose. The purpose of the hospital is to treat the sick. The purpose of the community is to provide the necessary services for the city. And yeah, they might be guiding development and preventing bad things from happening, but that doesn't necessarily have a bold transformational vision. Okay, so what you see with emergence is the purpose of the entity is what it does. Okay, and so Southwest, actually, I think their vision is simply we want to be the most beloved, most efficient, and the most profitable airline. Okay, they're not changing the world, they just want to do what they do better than anyone else. And that better than anyone else, they've kind of defined, for the perspective of their stakeholder, of their shareholders, from the perspective of their employees, and from the perspective of their customers. Okay, so I think it's a matter of kind of, this is the figuring out what really matters. And I also believe that figuring out what really matters is an iterative process. Okay, and you don't necessarily get it right on the first try, but if you get it wrong, you start to notice a dissonance between what you say matters and what you want to do. And the doing kind of has well, usually the doing has priority unless you really want to apply a course correction.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Yes, Kalina, go ahead.
If nobody wants or is ready just yet, I actually on the spur of the moment thought of another thing. I gather you're in the States, from the States originally, and I lived for 2 years there, and I appreciate so much freshness comes from people who think in some different way from other entrepreneurial thinking, perhaps, or lack of it in Europe or the German-speaking world in Europe. Do you already have a sense, or have you, like, my question is, would this kind of apply to culturally different mindsets and business culture in a different setting from your experience today? On the executive level, I mean. Okay.
If you one of if we look at the history of the Agile movement and Scrum in particular, there would always be people that say, oh, no, Scrum won't work here because, and you can Google, put, in quotes, Scrum won't work in France because, or Scrum won't work in China because, or Scrum won't work in, pick a place, any place. Scrum won't work in a regulated environment because, okay? And, the arguments are always the same, okay? So, there's always a certain skepticism to new things. And, one of the things I've discovered is if I come and I want to talk to people about my solution, no one wants to talk to me. If I come and want to talk to people about their problems, everybody wants to talk to me, okay? So that's, one of the things that, if you want people to pay attention to you, and this is actually, one of the things we teach in personal agility, listen first. Listen before you talk, ask before you tell, and when you ask clarifying questions, okay? And it's remarkably powerful. So my experience on this, I discovered the concept of working agreements fairly early on as one of my very first private Scrum trainings. I had a very, very difficult audience of middle managers who didn't really want to be there, and they were just the most undisciplined people I'd ever seen. They would arrive late, they would be on their phones, they would be, I don't know, never mind. Anyway, and so what I did is I said, okay, well, let's create some working agreements about how to work together. Okay, and we agreed to be on time, and we agreed to turn off our phones, and a couple of other things. And so it obviously changed how things were in class. And so it was a 3-day class. This was on day 1. Day 2, I asked them, what did you notice about the change? And they were like, wow, this is completely different. And I says, well, what would it, how is this different than real work in real life? God, what would it be like if we could make this real? And they were like, wow, this is fantastic. And I think this is where they decided that they were going to apply this stuff, because they just realized how much more effective it was. So and much later, I was in Switzerland. Someone asked me, these working agreements, it seems to me, I took your course, I took your CSM course 6 months ago, I took your CSPO course, we came up with pretty much the same agreements. Do you always get the same agreements? Would you get the same agreements in India? And I said, I don't know, I've never been to India, but let's find out. Because I actually had a trip to India planned, and so we did that. What surprised me about India is that they kind of identified some novel solutions for some of the problems. But the issues and problems they identified were the same. and the conclusion that I came to is that what motivates people as people is surprisingly universal. Everybody wants to be treated with respect. Okay, everybody wants to be told the truth. Everybody wants to be listened to when they speak. Okay, these at the values and principles level, especially the values level, people are remarkably the same everywhere. What's different is culture. Okay, so let's say your context is different. Okay, so for instance, if you're in a place, I mean, I've actually come to the belief that places like India and Vietnam, many Asian countries, and even some Western countries, are very high fear environments. People are afraid of the consequences of saying the truth. And that causes them to be very, very careful what they say until they know they can trust you. Okay, so it kind of emphasizes the importance of creating, what's now known as psychological safety in the Agile community. Okay, and these things are even more important in areas that are kind of low trust cultures. So I actually believe that working agreements are a way to negotiate cultural barriers. Like if I'm working, in fact, I just started a project with someone from India, and I said, let's have a conversation about what yes and no mean, and let's make clear that it's okay to say no, or to raise a question, or to raise an issue, because the truth is going to come out sooner or later, and I'd rather get it sooner than later. And we agreed to that, and well, I'll tell you in a couple of weeks how well that's working. But I think you can negotiate cultural issues by being very explicit and very concrete in your working agreements. Okay, and does agility work? As I say, I think agility is fundamentally about learning, collaboration, and purpose. I think these things are pretty universal. How you do it might be different from one place to the next.
Right.
In fact, let me give you a concrete example about how. So we're now in Vietnam. Okay, Vietnam, in my humble opinion, is a relatively high fear society. I mean, it had a war not too long ago. It's got a single party government. And it's a very authoritarian government. I mean, they just shut the country down, for COVID, and there wasn't much discussion about it, which is, unthinkable in Switzerland. So we have the issue. As a, developer, if you have an impediment, you're supposed to raise it at the daily scrum. Okay, but we have a cultural norm which says don't embarrass the leaders. Okay, which means don't embarrass the scrum master, because the scrum master, even though the scrum master is supposed to be equal, he's not seen as equal. Okay, so people weren't sharing their impediments. And I actually did a workshop around values, and I said something which I think offended people. I remember this one guy kind of in a huff says, as a Vietnamese, I value the truth. Okay, so very clear, there's no question, do we value the truth? Okay, the question is, how do we express it? Okay, and so what this team did is they came up with a solution to the impediment problem. If you're a developer and you have an impediment, something is slowing you down, it is your duty to put a red dot on the card. When you get to the daily scrum, the scrum master will ask you what the red dot is about. Okay, and it's perfectly okay for the superior to ask the inferior, what's the problem? Okay, and so you'll notice we value the truth, we value getting the impediment out, we have a social norm about how to do it, which needs to be negotiated. Okay, and so that for me is negotiating cultural barriers.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you very much, Peter. Is there any other question, Jan? You want to ask a question to Peter?
I would say thanks very much, Peter, as well. Indeed.
This
for the links.
Very good, Peter. And apologize not having launched the recording straightforward when you started, but I will manage that. And
okay, that happens to me all the time. It's a very common problem. I wish it were easier to notice if you were recording or not. Especially when you're saying, hey, I'm the administrator, or I'm kind of making this happen. Okay. I put my LinkedIn back into the chat, and if you guys would like to reach out to me, share a question, download the book, I'd be very happy to stay in touch, and I'd love to hear what you do with the information that you've gotten today. What were your In fact, that might even be. Could we do like a closing circle? What were your aha moments coming out of this event?
Yep.
That would be really interesting.
Yes. Who wants to start sharing? Yeah, we need the one to start first.
Well, I like the word emergent, and actually in the Business Agility Institute, we got a magazine called Emergent. So I hope that we could.
There's a reason for that.
Sorry?
I believe there's a reason for that. Yes.
Yeah.
I think this is the same reason than the one you mentioned. The word I would like to give is the resonance between what you said. What is resonance between the personal agility on a working environment and personal agility in life? I see a lot of resonance within these two, and it's I'm going to explore that a little bit more. Sylvie, Jean-Claude, Jovan, Fabien, Thomas, Emma, Maru, one word to close up.
I really liked how you said that change leadership is about marketing. So really get to know yourself, really get to understand what it is that your purpose is, and then bring that clarity into your marketing and invite people in versus something that you're selling and something that you're forcing on people. I really like that. Thank you for sharing.
I think for me, it was like a light bulb when I actually linked the words like priority and value and the Kanban board. So in a way, we all know, well, I've known this, what's important and all that prioritized, but actually when you go a step further and think about the value and the impact, the why is that, yeah, and the iterative, like the impediment of following the track and being consistent with that for me was perhaps the iterative, lacking the iterative was like, just celebrating and lacking the iteration of getting there, like the journey of correction, so to say, that actually create the momentum for celebration and forward movement, rather than just despondence of the priority, but actually not quite being there. It's just a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's time to thank you very much again, Peter, for this. And I think that I will send an email to the people that registered for this training and to get their feedback on that. Okay, if you can, I will send an email.
Awesome. Mm-hmm.
And okay, and Irma would share as notes. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. And a lot of I will send you back the Peter the feedback I received from the people that registered to that. Okay, and
I'm looking. Irma has said 5 pages of notes.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Oh my. I'm very impressed.
And I should you should have the recording on the Business Agility Institute YouTube channel.
Awesome.
And I will, as soon as they do it, I will send an email to the people that will register to this meetup and with your URL. But you can go to YouTube and look for Business Agility Institute, and you'll find the channel. And I think in 2 weeks from now, because it takes a little bit of time in the BAI to get it, and we will post it with Diane. Okay. And a special
awesome.
A special copy for Peter with a gift or things like that. Okay, thank you very much again, Peter. I wish you a very good evening and night for everybody, and I hope you will apply what Peter told you because it's very powerful. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Jean-Yves, for the invitation, and Ian. Yes.
Yeah.